Okay, looks like we're live, and welcome everyone. We'll let people get connected and get set up here. There's a little bit of a delay on our side on the system, so when I say something, you hear it about 15 seconds later. So we'll just wait here for a minute and let everyone get settled, get everyone ready to go for this pretty exciting webinar on bulletproofing your processes with simulation modeling. And we're going to try something new here and risky. What I'm going to do is go through a little bit of introduction, share with you some case histories. These are actual case histories that I've experienced or been close to. And then we're going to actually use, with one of these case histories, use a simulation model that I have loaded up here. And we're going to use it as you might use it on one of your projects. The risky part is that we're trying to do this live. Usually I try not to use software because there's so many things that can go wrong. But we're gonna walk on this tightrope and give it a try. I know what to do, but I have to click on the right buttons at the right time to get this to work. So I say that because if things really blow up here, what we'll do is we'll record this webinar and send you a link. I don't expect that's going to happen, but I just want to let you know that it could, since this is kind of an experiment. Could you do something for me, folks, the ones that are connected so far? If you're using simulation in your company or personally, right now, type in the software you're using. I'd just be curious. If you don't have simulation in your company or not using it now, let me know that too, not using simulation. There's a chat box over here that you can do that in. I just like to do a little survey and get some sense of where people are at in terms of their maturity in this topic. So either if you happen to know what the software is, just type that in there. Otherwise, not using it. And we'll be able to take a look at that and kind of measure the level of maturity of our students and know what you might be interested in the future. Okay, so with that, I am going to turn off the camera, and I'm going to go over and do some screen sharing. And let's see. Let's see if this is going to work. There we go. And we'll get started. So here we are, and let's get going. Bulletproof your lean designs with simulation. So the reason this topic is so important is that with lean designs, especially when we talk about mixed model line designs, there's this opportunity for things to go wrong. And you don't want them to go wrong once you've actually implemented your idea. Because sometimes they're quick and easy, easy to fix, and many times they're not. Many times they're bigger projects, and you don't want to have to be Kaizening your line design after it's already in place, because that's clearly embarrassing and also the most expensive time to do that. Now, the challenge, though, is the lean design tools that we have in our toolkit, the static line design tools, are great. They're going to get you close, but they're not going to get you all the way, because the static tools will not help you understand the impact of things like variability. And this is, again, incredibly important in a mixed model line. So we're going to go through some examples and share with you how we might address this gap, let's say, in our line design methodology. So review method and risks of static. Static means spreadsheet based, with calculations and formulas and standard times and takt time, all those things, but still not really being tested in a live kind of environment. I'll share with you a case history. This is the $300 million mistake, and I didn't make this up. This is an actual example that involves simulation. So I think you'll be interested to hear that. And then more to the point of this webinar, we're going to talk about another case history that involved me. Personally, this was one of my first line design projects as a professional lean consultant, quite a few years ago now. and how something, I think they started me on something they thought was pretty simple, but how something so simple can go off the rails. It wasn't a disaster, but it could have been better. And if we'd had some of these tools that we'll be looking at, it would have been a lot better. And finally, the match made in heaven. So mixed model simulation demo. So we're going to actually get into the tool itself, a tool, let's say one of many. But this is where the risky part comes in when we try to switch back and forth and show you this live. And then we have, okay, once you've heard this, how to get started. So what could you do to use some of these tools without having to become a total simulation, professional and change your careers? Because that's probably not going to happen to most of us. So that's the agenda. So let's get going. Quick review, static line design. So this is, you have data, you've collected data, and you have things like forecast daily volume. So for each of these models, I think there are 10 models in this example, this kind of a simulated spreadsheet you see here. 10 different models. For each of those, we have some idea of the capacity we want, and they all add up to the total capacity of the line. So the total forecast daily volume, 7.2 units. That's a day, in a day. That could be one shift or two shifts, but it's in a 24-hour period. And then we have in the last two columns here, main assembly and boom feeder. You have two processes, and those are times in seconds or minutes. Depending on what your unit of measures, you need to be consistent. Minutes, I think they are in this case. And then you have standard time weighted. So you notice there are many different times. So what time do we use? Well, we calculate a weighted average, and 213 is the weighted average for this range of times you see here. And then we have effective work minutes. So 420 minutes, that's how many minutes a day are available with someone at the station actually doing work, not going to lunch, not going to meetings, not getting ready, not cleaning up, but actually doing work, 420 minutes per day. So it looks like one shift. And then we do a couple simple calculations, takt time in minutes, so 58 minutes per unit, 58.33. That's simply the volume and the 420 minutes. And then we have a resource calculation, so that's the time divided by the takt time, so the work content time divided by the takt time, 3.66 for main assembly and 1.63 for boom feeder. And if we're talking about workstations, then we'd have to round up. So we have 4 and 2. So easy enough, right? I mean, it could take weeks and weeks or longer to gather all this data and do this analysis, especially if you have lots of products. But that's the static line design methodology. So that's a great starting point. And this is what we do, right? Great starting point, but it's not going to get you all the way there. So by all the way there, I mean all the way to a robust line design that can handle variability, handle changes in the mix, changes in the volume, etc. So what kind of things can go wrong? So I'm sure there are more things that can go wrong than this, but these are the main ones. And the seriousness of all of these is high. So changes in mix and volume. Remember, we're designing for a kind of a representative mix and volume of parts when we design the line in the worksheet you just saw. But what if that changes? Well, can it change? Sure, it is going to change. I mean, it's virtually guaranteed that mix and volume that we use to design with is not going to happen because the customer wants to buy what they want to buy, and they don't care what our original mix was when we designed the line. So changes in mix and volume can have an impact on line performance. Operator-related variability. Remember, we have something called a standard time, but do people always hit that standard time? Well, obviously not. People are not robots. And even the same person can work faster or slower during the day, depending on how they feel, and are they dragging at the end of the day, et cetera. So that's important to know. Product mix, work content variability. So in a mixed model line, as we saw again in the spreadsheet you just looked at, not all the work content is the same from product to product. So as those products go down the line, that work time is going to vary. So the idea of a level loading perfectly is basically an impossibility. You can do a good job or not so good job, but the idea that you're going to level load the workflow is just simply not going to happen in a mixed model environment. Machine variability. Again, are the machine times consistent, or do we have, for whatever reason, some variability in those times? So that could be an additional impact. And then a couple other things, lack of sequencing rules. So the order in which we do the work in a mixed model line is going to be important. So we have certain rules. I remember hearing from Toyota Material Handling of quite a high mix of products on their fork truck factory. And as part of a daily discipline, they had a set of rules, I think it was about 30 or more, that they would look at and apply to their backlog of products to set the daily schedule, right, on a daily basis. So this is an ongoing thing. It doesn't go away. And then finally, a large number of interdependencies. So it makes a big difference if this is a small cell with a few stations or if it's a longer value stream with a lot of interconnected processes, a lot of workstations. And of course, the larger the number of interdependencies, then the more risky that eventual output at the end of the line becomes. So these are all things that we know are important, but that are difficult to understand just in your head. Sure, if you've been bitten in the past on some design, you may know to watch out for this or watch out for that. That's part of just becoming an experienced designer, but it's not very scientific. It's more, gut feel. We need to have another workstation here, or we need to add some buffers there. All that's good, but it's, again, not a formal methodology that you can apply, and that's really what we'd prefer to have. So fortunately, we do have something like that, and it's called simulation modeling. So this is kind of like, again, I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but this is kind of like an electronic wind tunnel simulation model. So we build a model, here's a formal definition, build a model of a value stream, right, or a production cell, or an office process, or a hospital process, and we're able to run that model in compressed time. So it runs on a computer, so that an hour of elapsed time could be run in as few as a few seconds, right, in a simulation model. And why are we doing this? Well, we want to perform experimentation. We want to run experiments. Try this, try that. Now, there are some optimization software opportunities out there, but by and large, what we're doing here is trying things out based on our past experience and history, future anticipated mix and volumes, in order to test this system in a computer environment before we actually physically put it in place. So we want to try to predict the system's performance by running experiments, just like a wind tunnel for an airplane, right? You're running experiments with different wing designs to test the lift, so you don't have to do it, or hopefully when you get to the actual physical airplane, it's going to work as expected, which is, needless to say, the way you want to go and the cheapest way to test those wings. So I think, again, I'm preaching to the choir here. Now, when do we need simulation? Well, you have a quadrant here, and the higher the variability, so that's people, machines, mixed model environment, the higher the variability or the higher the number of interdependencies, the more critical it is to test your design using simulation. So we have 4 quadrants. High variability would be high need, and high interdependency would be high need. Both of those would be virtually a must do if you want to avoid a lot of adjustments afterwards. Now, the lower left quadrant says optional, lower variability, lower interdependency. But as you'll see here in this webinar, that's not true either, because the example I'm going to share with you was pretty much low variability and low interdependency, and still it would have been very helpful. So on the right side of the slide, consider simulation as a higher priority or important if you have a line that doesn't exist, or you don't really know how it's going to perform, or it's complex. The behavior of this value stream is too complex to really understand in a spreadsheet, or you have a situation where you can't actually disrupt physically the line once it's in place, or the existing one can't be disrupted. It's going to be very expensive. That's a big red flag. If you're going to be spending a lot of money on this, it makes sense to take part of your budget and build a simulation model. Or you made past decisions based on gut feel, experience, etc., but didn't work out, got bit on that in the past. So these are all good reasons where you might want to consider this. All right, so let me share with you a really interesting case history. I think I mentioned this in a previous webinar. I might be repeating myself for some of you, but really interesting one. It's the $300 million mistake. And sometimes we don't really share the companies name, but I thought I'd just stick it in there because it was a long time ago and the company was bought by, what was it, HP? So I don't think we're at risk, but here's the story. Back in the late 90s, this company, Compaq, one of the leading PC manufacturers, was competing with a company called Dell. And Dell was famous at that time, and still is, for building computers to order, right? Configure to order. So they don't build your computer ahead of time. They don't assemble it ahead of time. You place the order, you specify the memory, hard drive, et cetera, and then they assemble the computer for you. And that has a lot of advantages over what Compaq was doing, which is build a bunch of generic boxes of the same model and then have a third party actually swap out the memory and swap out the hard drive or do whatever's required. So that's clearly more expensive. And Compaq knew that and they wanted to compete with Dell, right? Made sense. And actually creating a mixed model line configured to order, I mean, there's some system implications. How does the order get processed and received, and how does it get communicated, and all those good things. But fundamentally, it's not that tough, right, to do that. You would have a disk drive stations, you have an assortment of disk drives, and based on this order, maybe the paperwork goes with the chassis. You look at which disk drive is required, and that's the one you install, right? So it's not too tough. I mean, it sounds easier than I'm sure it is, but not impossible. So that's what they wanted to do. But here's a thing. Here's where they had some uncertainty. Dell had this policy. I don't think they knew this, actually, but Dell actually had a policy limiting the order quantity to 20 units. So what if you want 100 computers? You can't buy them? No, of course you can buy 100 computers, but you're buying them in lots of 20. Right? 5 orders of 20 each. So why did Dell do that? Well, because they wanted to be able to ship in smaller quantities and not have to ship complete and store 100 computers, right, before they would put on a truck. They had the freedom, the flexibility to ship in smaller order quantities. So that's why they did that. Compaq didn't have that, so you could specify as many as you wanted. So the question they had was, Compaq had, was in this new factory that we're building, right, to do this mixed modeling, configured to order stuff, how much staging space do we really need? Didn't really know, because we had some idea of past order history, order sizes, and so on, but they hired one of the top consulting companies in the country, expensive, right? I forget who they were, Pricewaterhouse, Accenture, somebody like that. To do this analysis. And of course, they did a static analysis, right, with a spreadsheet, and they came up with a recommendation of 25,000 square feet of staging space, kind of at the end of the line, right, to consolidate orders and get them on the truck, that kind of thing. So they said, okay, we can handle that. We'll build that into our design. But then at the 11th hour, kind of close to before it was, a little bit before it was too late, they decided to get a second opinion, and they hired a company that, full disclosure, I worked for, and this is how I know this story. I worked for them for a couple of years in just after the new millennium started. And they asked this company, and they were experts in this, to build a simulation model, right? So let's model the factory. Here's the order mix that we anticipate, representative, and tell us as an output what staging space is needed. And so they did. They created this model and estimated, based on the average order quantities and so on, what space was going to be required, the size of the units, number of shells required, all that stuff. So it's a real industrial engineering kind of project. And they came back to Compaq and said, you need, per our analysis, 100,000 square feet. So Compaq had to make a decision. Who do we believe, basically? We got 25,000 square feet from one of the best consulting companies in the world, and we have this smallish, simulation consulting group over in San Diego that tells us we need 100,000. And 100,000 really changes things a lot for us. Really jumps the cost up. We weren't planning on that, et cetera. So they made the logical decision to go with the 25,000. We like that number better. And they went back to Quran Consulting Group, the name of the company, and said, well, thanks, but no thanks. right? Thanks for your effort, but clearly there's something seriously wrong with your model. You're so far off from the best estimates. There's something clearly wrong. So go ye henceforth, don't darken our doors again. So they proceeded, and here comes this line live. So they build the buildings, put in that space sometime later, right? Some months later, and they start ramping up production. And as soon as they hit the volumes that the model predicted, they sure enough started running out of space. And it got bad. No place to put things coming off the end of the line. So they had to have trailers, waiting outside, temporary storage, a lot of, non-value added material movement to keep the area clear, just to keep things going. And at some point they realized this wasn't going to work. This was not there's no long-term solution. We need to stop and kind of start over. So why do I say this is a $300 million mistake? This was their estimate. Not so much the cost, the out-of-pocket cost, but the market opportunity. Their opportunity to establish themselves at that time as a real player in this world of mixed modeling configured order, the amount of time they lost was huge. And the market loss, they figure, in lost sales, lost profits, was in the range of $300 million, which was huge. And the final cherry on the sundae of the story is about 6 months later, Dr. Ali Karan, the head of this consulting company, got a phone call from the president of this division. And the president said something like, Dr. Karan, look, we gave you a hard time when you built this model for us, and I'm calling to apologize because you guys were right. And if we'd listened to you, we would have been in a lot better shape. So I thought I'd share that with you because sometimes this can have major impacts, like this one, on failure to create a simulation model, or failure to believe the output of the simulation model when it's not what you wanted to hear. So with that, let's continue on. And here's another one. Here's the one we're going to get into in this webinar. So this is another company. You've heard this. Again, I'm mentioning names because this was a long time ago. What they're doing today, I have no idea. And they're great faucets, so I'll give them a little advertising here. So Moen, one of the top names, right? Delta, Moen, Price Pfister. One of the top names. You go to Home Depot, you find Moen there a lot. And I'm sure different plumbers have different preferences, and some really like Moen, some don't, et cetera. So here's Moen. Now, one thing about Moen, and really all their competitors too, they have a ton of different models. So they have kitchen and sink and bath and shower and utility room. Yeah, I mean, all kinds of different models. And this particular factory, it was in New Bern, probably still is, New Bern, North Carolina. Really nice spot, former capital. Was just the assembly plant. So the casting, the casting processes, plating, those kind of things were done elsewhere. So this is simply taking parts, some of which were purchased, some of which came from another Moen plant somewhere else, and assembling them into a product that could be sold, like at Home Depot or wherever, and put in a box, right, and boxed up. That was the work. So I think they gave this project to me. This was my first lean design project that I was actually officially responsible for, as opposed to being on the team. I was responsible for this one. And the idea here was to design a series of assembly cells based on the static methodology that you saw earlier, right, that we followed. But what could be easier? There's not much more than a minute of work content total, right, to assemble a faucet. The challenge was it was pretty high volume. They had a ton of these. I think they were assembling 100,000 sets, faucet sets a day in this plant. So a lot. So a lot of different cells, that's for sure. But each cell was pretty simple, right? 3 or 4 workstations. And the idea was to balance the work, right? Have 3 or sometimes 4 operators and flow those faucets down there, deliver the material via Kanban systems, have good work instructions, padded floor, really do everything we knew how to do to make it a good work environment, and build these faucets. And each one of the cells, I think it varied a little bit, but the target volume for each cell was about 1,200 units per day. It was one shift, right, in this plant. 1,200 units per day. Oh, I'll take it back. I'm not sure if it was one shift or not. I can't remember. But in a shift, it was 1,200 units. So that was the goal. What could be easier, right, for this new lean consultant? So let's get into, I'm going to switch gears, and we're entering the risky part now, but let's shift gears here, and I'm going to show you how I might have done it, or picture yourself in my shoes, right? How I might have done this if I'd had these tools available. So we're going to shift over to some simulation software. Now, this software is software that we use. It's Excel-based, but it's actual, discrete event dynamic simulation modeling. So behind, underneath the hood, it works the same way as any of the better known, commercial software packages, Simulate, ProModel, Arena, et cetera. There are a lot of them, but it works the same way basically, but it was designed for this kind of application. So assembly lines or linear office processes, not really designed to optimize a job shop kind of environment with lots of, infinite number of different routings. Not really designed for that, but it was designed for where you have a pretty good flow going. It can accommodate feeder lines and things like that. In this case, it was just so simple. It's what you see here. We had 4 stations, and the work was balanced evenly. There was a little bit more than a minute of work content. So the takt time here was around 20 seconds, which in retrospect was probably too short. Now, what is Moen doing today? I have no idea. This would be a good candidate for automation, to be perfectly honest. But at the time, we had people doing this with a 20-second takt time. So every 20 seconds, a finished faucet goes into a box, right, onto a pallet. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to, I guess you can still hear me, right? I'm going to stop screen sharing, and then I'm going to go to another worksheet and share it with you. Okay, I think that was successful. I just have to be very cautious every time I do this. So what I'm going to share with you first is how I might have, or how you could, right, build this model using this particular tool. There, every simulation software product would be slightly different, but I think the basics would be very similar. So here's how this one works. First, you define a line. So if we had a feeder line here, I would have to define that as another line. So every main line and every feeder line would be defined separately. In this case, it's just a cell with, as you'll see, 4 workstations. So we have a line, and then we have a description. So as simple as that. So that's the flow description. Under resources, I think this is big enough you can probably see this. Under resources, I have defined 4 cells, or 4 workstations, final 1, 2, 3, and 4. So those are the 4 workstations that our static design told us we needed. And then we have operator 1. It's just a code for an operator type, which would be an assembler in this case, and code for O operator. And I have 4 of these. So 4 workstations, and I have 4 people, and they can work on 1 unit at a time. If I scroll over here a little bit, I'll show you some of the things that we haven't turned on yet, because the first thing I always want to do is validate this, see if it's going to work. But the number of IPKs after each station is set to 0, so no in-process kanmans or buffers initially. And the other thing to point your attention to is this column here that says variability, and I'm saying none. That means whatever time we define is always exactly that time. People work like robots. Now, I'm going to change this, but for the moment, that's what we're doing just so we can test the model and make sure that it's working. Okay? Now, I take those resources I defined and I define the relationship or the flow, the routing, if you want to use that term. So on this particular worksheet, which is the 3rd one, I tell the system that we have a flow line, right, called line. And I have station final 1, which connects to final 2 over here. And there's a required resource, which is operator 1. Remember, I have 4 operator 1s. And then final 2 connects to final 3 connects to final 4 connects to pound exit pound. That's simply a system specific indicator that that's the end of the line, right? End of line. So simple as that. Now, this could be much more complex, but we're keeping it simple here just so we understand. Now, next one is called products. I think there might have been some variation in the work content time, but I'm leaving that out for the moment. I'm just saying they have one product. Lots of different models, but from a product point of view, it's all the same. And we're calling it faucet. This could be an actual part number in this column here, but I'm just calling it a faucet, and we're defining the standard work for that. And that faucet is going to be built on this line. Okay, so easy enough. And then we have process times. So these labor times are all in minutes. So these would be standard times. So for every product, and again, you could have dozens of different products with different times, and stations. So we're defining this time down to the workstation. You define a machine time. We don't have any machines, so it's blank, and labor time, 0.33. So you can see our total work content time is 1 minute and 0.33, or so 1.33 minutes to assemble one of these and one operator. Finally, last but not least, we have a sequence. So the sequence would be your production lineup. So we only have one product here. Again, this could be a mix of different products, but again, we're keeping it simple here. So I have this product called faucet, and again, I want to build 1,500 of these. I'm just putting a number in here, just so we don't run out of orders while we're running this model. Okay, so that's all we need. So interesting thing to point out to you here, we've actually built this model at the same time that we've entered the data. So we're entering required data, and we've actually designed the model. That's because this particular simulation tool was designed for this kind of application, right? Assembly lines, or it could be office processes, could be hospital processes, but they're all pretty sequential, one step after another, et cetera. With feeders, with those good things, but designed for that environment. All right, so let's try this again. I'm going to stop the presentation, and I am going to take you over to the engine part of it. So this is actually two Excel files. We've got the data file, and then you've got the engine that's going to run it. And that's what we see over here. And this is where we look at the output after the simulation is run, and this is where we launch the actual simulation calculation. We can click on validate here. I did that already, and so there's no errors, but you could check your model to make sure there's no errors in the model. But let's just go right to simulate, and I'm coming right to here, and I'm going to move this down a little bit. And what we have here then are the 4 stations. You're not going to see the products moving down the line, but there is a simple animation based on this color coding. And we're going to set this for a warm-up time of 5 minutes. What that means is we're going to wet this line. It's going to run the line for 5 minutes before it starts collecting data, and then we're going to run for 400 minutes. So if we have a 20-second takt time, that's 3 units per minute, right? And we run for 400 minutes with no variability, no buffers or anything, I would expect to get 1,200 units, right, at the end of 400 minutes. So this is part of the test you might want to do to make sure the model is basically structured correctly. And this is where the risk comes in for me, because I'm going to click on this button here that says run. What it does is it pulls the data in from the worksheet, and it starts running. And you can see the progress bar. I hope you can see this on your screen. There's a little progress bar. It takes about, 10 seconds or so to run this. It could be faster. I think I have a lot of orders that it's processing. It's probably slowing it down a little bit, but not going to slow us down too much. And then here come the results. Perfect. So we have 1,200 units. So what that tells me then is that this model is basically structured correctly, but it's not reflecting reality. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to stop this one more time. I'm going to go back to the data file. Share it. Okay, we're back to the data file. Now here's what we actually did. I'm going to make some changes here. We actually did have IPKs at the end of each of these stations. What that means is we allowed one piece in between each workstation, one additional piece. So we added some inventory, but I think the inventory cost was, $10 per unit. It wasn't going to bankrupt the company having a few extra pieces. And what we were hoping to do there is overcome some of this variability. The other thing, though, I'm going to add to this model is I'm going to add some variability. So there's a drop down here, and I'm going to set it to high. Now, what kind of variability is this? It's basically in a short takt time environment, even a very small delay is a big percentage of that time. So even if you come in and say, hey, Mary, hey, John, how are you doing today? You just lost a takt time. So in a very short takt, the lesson here is that a short takt time environment, this issue of variability becomes really critical because it's so easy to miss cycles or miss big percentages of your takt time. Remember, it's only 20 seconds long. You take 5 seconds to do something unplanned and you just lost 25% of your takt time. So I'm going to add variability here. So the only two things I changed was I added IPKs, right, a buffer of 1 piece, and I changed this variability to high. So I go up here and I save this. Again, I'm being very cautious here. I'm going back to the engine. I'm being extremely cautious. I think I did it. And I'm going to click on simulate. Now, those are the only 2 changes we made, correct? And we're going to see, again, this is kind of our baseline design. This is what I actually did at this company. And remember, our goal, management was very fixated on this. They wanted 1,200 units per shift. So I'm going to run, clicked on the run button. I could show you the animation, but I'm not going to because it slows it down having to display these colored lights. But if you're debugging a model, animation can be very useful. You run it very slowly and kind of follow a product through. In this case, I don't think we really need it. So I added IPKs and I added variability to that work time. So it's going to randomize that time within a certain range so that it's no longer 0.33 of a minute. It's going to be sometimes more, sometimes less, as we might expect. And the results are 1147. Okay, so our actual results, by the way, and I think this was because if you have a variation in time, it usually wasn't faster. It was usually over that 20 seconds because something happened. I dropped a part, something happened. It wasn't equally balanced by sometimes where it's less than 20 seconds. So my results were not even as good as this. It was more in the range of 1,000 something units per day. And I'll have to tell you also that our actual physical experience when we brought these cells live was the same. So we were getting about 1,000, sometimes a little less, in the 900 range. So we weren't where we needed to be, right? And the reason I'm showing you this is embarrassing if you're a lean designer and your design is not performing the way that management expects it to perform. Okay, so we need to make some changes. So put yourself in my shoes and imagine that I had this tool. I'm going to stop this. I'm going to go back to my data sheet. And remember, we said we're going to use simulation to run some experiments. So in my case, these cells were already physically in place when we were learning this out. So we were somewhat more limited to some of our choices. But one of the things that would be fairly easy, these are small parts, not a lot of inventory, was to increase the buffer size. So I'm going to add a couple additional pieces between stations. And this is in fact what we did at Moen. We added 3 pieces instead of 1. The variability is still high. So I'm going to save this and we're going to go back again, stop and go back to our engine, and we're going to click on the simulate button, and we're going to run this again. Run. And see if what we want to see is, does this really improve performance? Adding buffers sometimes can be a great improvement, sometimes not so much. So we'll evaluate that. Remember, our goal, management's looking over my shoulder, they want 1,200. So that's what we're hoping to get. Again, I didn't have this tool. So we were doing our experimentations in the real world with human beings and people. But again, if I'd had this tool, this would have been something we would have been doing in the conference room before we actually did any kind of factory rearrangement or purchased new workstations and did all these things. We did, or balanced the line to these 4 workstations. Okay, I think we're just about ready. And here we go. And 1179. So what did I say, 1200? So we're within the range. We're getting closer. And this, in fact, is, again, my actual results were not quite as good as this. By putting in 3 IPKs, it jumped it up to the 1100 range. I don't think it was that close to 1200, but we're getting closer, but we're still not there. So again, I'm going to stop. I'm going to go back to the data sheet, and we're going to look at what else we might be able to do. So we have here additional buffers. I could virtually guarantee you that by adding more, it's not going to show any improvement. Can we reduce this variability? That sounds good, and that's kind of like the level loading philosophy, right? Make sure the work is standardized, training, all those things, and we could go from a high to maybe a medium. Yes, that's worth doing, but again, keep in mind in a true mixed model environment, there are limitations to how much you can actually accomplish there, because you're going to have some variability that's not really in your control. It's the variability of the different products, right, and the different work content coming down there. Now, if we were in a conference room and management said to us, you absolutely positively need to hit that 1200 in a reliable kind of way, one thing I would do, and I can try to do this here, you can see me in action here. I'm going to copy this line. I'm in the resources tab, and I'm going to, let's see here, I'm going to select this. I'm going to right click. I'm going to insert I'm going to insert a new workstation. Right, so I'll call this final 5. So I'm adding another workstation. Again, for us, it would have been impossible at that time. It was already physically in place, but I've added another workstation. Let's see if we have all this data here. No, we need to populate a few more things. Okay, so all the characteristics are the same, but it's just one more workstation. Now on the flow, I need to do the same thing. So I'm going to copy this and then insert. It should be allowing me to insert a whole new row. Why is it not doing that? Copy. There, insert copied cells. So fin 3 now goes to fin 4, and fin 5 goes to end. And then I need to make sure these are hooked up correctly. So fin 3 goes to fin 4. Fin 4 goes to fin 5. Okay, so I just added another workstation, and now I'm going to go to standard work. This is the products that didn't change, and then the process times. Again, I need to add. We've added another process, rather another workstation, another resource, and these times change too. So if it's 0.33, I'm now distributing that time over 5 workstations, correct? So I need to reflect that in the time. So I believe that's something like 0.27. I did this before, and that seemed to work. So the total work content didn't change, but I'm now balancing it across 5 stations instead of 4, right? And the sequence is going to be the same. Okay, so I'm going to save that. So the question I'm trying to answer here is, if we added another workstation, is that going to help us? Clearly it will, right? But let's see what that actually does for us. So I go back to the engine, and I click on simulate, and I click on run. Again, it's going to pull, every time I make a change and save it, it's going to pull that data in fresh from that data file, and then it's going to run that model again. There we go. It seems slower. Something this simple should be running faster. I think it's because I have a lot of orders in that order file that I don't really need. I could have cleared that out. But in any case, certainly faster than doing anything in the physical world. Remember, it's running a whole day's worth of production, at least a whole shift worth of production, 400 minutes. And our goal was 1200. So by adding another resource, did that help or not? That's what we're trying to find out. I think you may, I just remembered something I didn't do. I didn't add another operator. So I only have 4 people, but I have 5 workstations. So what the simulation is going to do is have them move and flex. Can that overcome some of the variability? Usually it will, but I'll be curious to see how this is going to come out. Almost done. Hang in there with me. And here we go. All right, 1181. So you can see that went up a little bit. What was it, 1179 before? But still not where we need to be. I think I won't bore you further with this, but what you would see, what I saw this morning when I was playing with this myself, by adding a 5th person and a 5th workstation, you're in the 1400 range on this model. So over what we need. So that certainly would have been a solution, but not a very attractive one from the point of view of having to add another operator to each of these cells and another workstation. All right. So the bottom line here, let's kind of summarize what I got out of this, or hopefully what you got out of this in terms of lessons learned. So even a seemingly simple line design is what we're saying, can prove challenging. And I just shared an example that happened to me where we got close. We didn't actually get where we needed to be. Now, another thing that the company did, I believe, to get to that 1200 is just work the lines a little longer, right? So you're adding more time. So that was another way that we overcame this. But even something that seems really simple can be challenging for the reasons you just saw. And the shorter the takt time, the more this becomes critical. Right, the more, because you have more instances, more cycles of imbalance that need to be considered. And this was quite a short takt time. We usually don't recommend these days designing a 20-second takt time for human beings. People hate it, but that's what we had at the time. What we're trying to accomplish here is reduce the after the implementation changes, the need to do that. So this idea of Kaizen, or continuous improvement, should be for polishing, fine-tuning, small changes, not for major overhauls of your design. You really need to avoid that because, again, it's hugely expensive to have to do that. Now, there are all kinds of virtual reality tools. There's exciting developments in that world, but we've had simulation for a long time. And these software tools exist already. And 2D doesn't have to be fancy. You don't need a 3D kind of walk-through type environment. Don't really need that. 2D is fine. So in general, consider this as more of a requirement these days, especially for more complex challenges in terms of your line design and figuring out how to do this, right? How to get access. Some of you have access maybe to these tools and the expertise that goes along with it, and maybe some of you don't. So I just wanted to share with you an option here for getting your hands on this. So we have a simulation workshop that we're conducting next month. It's going to be in Genesee, Colorado. That's just right outside of Denver. And this software you just saw, the Excel-based tool, we're going to give it to you as part of this workshop. Only participants in this workshop. So you're going to get this software, and a fair amount of the class is going to be building models, starting from simpler ones to more complex ones of various types. And our goal here in this workshop is not that you become a simulation professional. That's probably not going to happen in 3 days, but you can become a simulation super user. That means you know the data that's required. You're able to interpret the output, critically important, because these systems will generate mountains of data to that you really need to understand, to identify bottlenecks, understand throughput. Where do we need to be focusing on for improvement? All of that kind of thing. So it's going to be really exciting because it's going to be really hands-on, but with some theory. And the guy that wrote the software, who is now the president of the Kaplan Business Group in San Diego, is going to be one of the instructors. So this is going to be incredible. And again, the big bonus is you're going to go home from this workshop with the software. Right? You're going to be able to bring it back with you. Now, this is a teaching tool. We're not trying to compete with Arena and ProModel and Simulate. So if you have a really more, say, challenging simulation opportunity, you may have to get help from those areas. But this is an Excel-based tool that, as you just saw, is really pretty easy to learn. It was for me. I mean, I'm as guilty as anyone in terms of being challenged with simulation from the point of view of the learning curve. And the learning curve here is really short. And there's some complexities. You need to understand what some of these things mean. I only showed you a portion of it, but not too tough. And we'll be going through that in detail along with the author of the software, Dr. Jalal Kaplan. So text here in your text box flyer, if you'd like us to actually email you a brochure with a little more detail, what the agenda is, what the subject matter is, and so on. If you'd like that, we can do that. You can also get that yourself on our website, leonardogroupamericas.com. So that's it. We're really excited about this workshop. It's really groundbreaking, and the fact that we can actually give you the software as a part of that just makes it that much better. Okay, so with that, let me know if you found this particular overview valuable. Seeing this in action, seeing this kind of tool in action, and how you might be using it for your design opportunities. As always, we ask you for ideas too. If there are other topics you'd like us to look at for future webinars, we'd be delighted to do that. Okay, it's 11:51, so 51 minutes, not bad. We'll let you go with that, and thank you so much for attending, and we'll look forward to hearing from you and staying in touch. Okay, bye now.